my name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here then welcome to my channel, and today's video is going to be a little bit extra special because today's video is going to be my spoiler-free review for Celestial Monsters by Aiden Thomas, which is the sequel and finale to the Sunbearer Trials Duology. The Sunbearer Trials was my favorite book that I read in 2022, and Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas was my favorite book that I read in 2021, so I was of course very excited for this book to come out. I basically read it as soon as I got my hands on it, and today is the day for its spoiler-free review and then also book series wrap-up. I will have the content warnings for both of these books linked down below in the description, along with links to some resources, and let's go ahead and get into it. The Sunbearer Trials takes place in a world where at the beginning of each decade the sun's power must be replenished in order for the evil obsidian gods to stay at bay. 10 semidioses are chosen to compete in the Sunbearer Trials, where the loser is sacrificed so that their body may protect everyone for the next 10 years. Our main character Teo is the trans son of the goddess of birds, and he has never really worried about the trials other than worrying about others in regards to the trials. However, that all changes when he gets chosen to compete against opponents who are better trained and more powerful than himself. Celestial Monsters picks up right where the Sunbearer Trials left off, and I will say the first chapter of this definitely felt like a lot because it throws a lot of the characters back at you right away and kind of at once. And like I said, I haven't read the Sunbearer Trials since 2022, which I did regret for about 15 pages of this. But I will say by the end of that first chapter, I was feeling really good, and I felt like I was successfully refamiliarized with who the characters are and just the general situation, which was such a huge relief, and I basically fell right back into this book and never left again until it was over. And let's go ahead and start by talking about the characters, and that of course means talking about our main character, Teo. And honestly, I actually don't know if I have anything new to say or to add to what I've already said about him in my Sunbearer Trials review. He's by far one of my favorite characters that I've ever read. I gelled with him immediately. That didn't stop in this book. I find him to be really likable and funny and easy to root for. He has a lot of personality and I love him for that. And I really loved him throughout this book. He takes kind of a leadership role, and it really did feel like the character growth and the journey that he went on in the Sunbearer Trials led to this version of him that we see in this book, and that was very lovely to read. And as for Nia, again, she was a huge favorite of mine in the first book. She still is, and I don't think I realized how much I missed her until she was on the page again, but I really did miss her. She has so many fun moments and lines and just so much heart, and again, just a ton of personality. She brings me a lot of joy. As for Aurelio, I really liked him. I feel like we really did get to dive a little bit more into him in this book. We got some angst. I feel like this book handled it well, and it made me just like and appreciate his character even more than I already did. And I will say before moving on that all three of them do have their own internal things that they're dealing with throughout their journey that does impact both the action scenes and also how they interact with others. It did lead to some really heartwarming moments for these characters by themselves, but also led to some really heartfelt moments between the characters together. Next up is going to be Zio. We got a lot of them, which I wasn't sure about at first, but I do think that this ended up being something that I really appreciated, especially by the end of the book. And it was also something that I do think that this book needed at the end of the day. As for the villains, they do a lot of talking, and it was almost to the point where I was wondering what else they were doing besides just talking, but at the same time the story kind of handles them in a way where it makes sense that they are just kind of sitting around. But yeah, the villains were there, but I did think that they were interesting, and I thought that they had some interesting abilities that made them fun to read about in fights. As for the rest of the cast, we got to see more of everyone from the previous book who competed in the trials, and I do think that I like them more in this book than I did then, which is saying something because I've always really liked them, but I do feel like their personalities got a chance to shine more in here, and that's mostly just through the banter. This book has some really fun banter. We also get to see more of some other characters and get introduced to some new ones, all of which I really loved. As for the relationships, this series and this book has some of my favorite friendships that I've ever read. You can really tell how much they love and care for one another, and I don't think I can accurately put into words just how fun that banter is that I mentioned earlier, but it's one of my favorite things about this book and this series as a whole, and that goes for the rivals, the friends, the romance, and also the enemies. And they do just have a lot of really fun comedy overall, and we also do have a very lovely romance in here as well. And I do really love them. I think they're adorable together, and I love seeing them interact throughout this book. They're one of my favorite romances that I've read this year for sure. They have some really incredible and beautiful moments in this book. And I do feel feel like the relationships and the romance and just the way the characters interact with one another are all things that I really do feel like make this series stand out. And there are just so many different personalities and identities, and on that note, definitely shout out to all the different representation in this book and in this series for sure. Something else that I definitely need to talk about is the world. One of my favorite things about the Sunbearer Trials was just getting to explore the world, and I've always wanted to explore more of it, and this book let me do that. And I am so happy about that because there are so many cool and amazing places, and it's also written by Aiden Thomas, so everything really came to life and just felt very atmospheric. And then there are also some really cool ideas and concepts, and we also got to really see places that we didn't get to see in book one. And on that note, this book does have a really interesting storyline surrounding the golds, the jades, and the humans, and just like the social hierarchy, and we've seen how the golds treat the jades and the discrimination there, but this really dives into the discrimination between like the golds and the jades with also the humans, and it really dives into how the humans are living and surviving during this whole situation and also prior to it, and how the golds and the jades have underestimated them, overlooked, and discriminated against them, and just how much privilege the golds and the jades have in this world, and how the history of the world has been altered and taught to them over the years. There are things that have been purposefully covered up that shouldn't have been, and you see the characters discover this, start to question things, and form their own opinions, and you see how that all starts to influence them and their decision making. And these are all, of course, topics that are very much, unfortunately, relevant in the real world today, as well as this fantasy one. As for the rest of the story, it is the end of the world, and our characters are trying to save it. And again, a lot of my favorite moments from the storyline just came from the interactions between the characters, and even just like the little things and the little moments. But there are also a fair amount of action scenes and fight scenes, which can be hit or miss for me, and I definitely feel like I was more immersed in the trials than I was the fight scenes in this book. But I do think that it mostly went well for me in here with the action scenes. Like, there were only a couple of moments where I zoned out and had to go back and reread a little bit, which usually there are many moments, and this book did have a lot of moments where I was fully immersed in the action scenes and like on the edge of my seat for what was coming next. And I do feel like that is mostly because, one, I love the characters, I love getting to see them shine and have like their cool action scene moments, but two, again, I feel like Aiden Thomas incorporated a lot of really cool concepts and beings to have those action scenes with. There's also a turn that this story takes that involves one of its characters. It's too spoilery to really get into in this video, but it is something that I do feel like happened a little bit fast. Like, I do feel like there were hints and things shown before this happened that did make sense and that were leading up to this, but I do really feel like there just needed to be like one more chapter or one more big moment to really bring it all together. But it's also like I really liked the turn that this book took at the same time, so how much do I really mind that? Which is something that I can kind of say for this entire book. No matter where they went or what they were doing, I was just fully immersed the entire way through, and I never wanted to put this book down because I was just on board for whatever they wanted to do, and I was loving it. And the story just had so many layers and so many moving parts, and the world just really does feel so alive to me. And I also will say I thought the ending maybe wrapped up just like a little too quickly from an emotional standpoint for the characters, but I also do feel like this book made it work enough, and I also do feel like the epilogue really helped wrap things up as well. And I thought that the epilogue did it in a really wonderful and lovely way that did make me feel better about some of the things that I was conflicted about that I mentioned throughout this review. And that's just kind of how I feel about this book, honestly. Like, even with the things that I was conflicted about and I feel like they could have done something more or something different, I also do feel like this book made it work enough where I came out of this book feeling incredibly happy and satisfied with how the series ended. And then also just with a new favorite book. And I also feel like it really does help that at this point I do have so much love for the characters, for Aiden Thomas's writing, for the relationships and the humor, and really just everything. Like, the series just has so much of my heart. It's definitely a favorite of all time, and I do really feel like that level of love and that level of enjoyment do honestly kind of overtake the complaints that I had about this, because those critiques do just kind of feel minor to begin with and didn't impact my reading experience almost at all. Like, I noticed them for sure, but they also didn't really bother me while I was reading, and they don't really bother me now that I'm talking about them. So do I think this is a perfect book? I mean, no, Probably not. But is it going to be my favorite book of 2024 anyway? It certainly has a good chance right now. So with that, I will be giving Celestial Monsters by Aiden Thomas 5 out of 5 stars, which is also what I gave the Sunbearer Trials. And it is also what I will be giving as my final rating for this duology as a whole. And this series just really has been such an incredible reading experience, from the characters to the relationships to the banter to the world, the storylines, and also the writing style. There's just something about this series that is just on a different level for me in just so many and maybe in all ways. Which is also exactly how I felt about Cemetery Boys after I read that, and I am just so sad that the series is over. I don't think I will ever have enough of these characters and relationships, honestly, but I cannot wait to see what Aiden Thomas writes next. Okay, so that is all that I have for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and answer the question that'll be around here if you want to do that, and hopefully I will see you here next time. Bye!